So I recently finished this book called We're the Economy, and towards the end, the author discusses this idea of unconditional happiness. Surprisingly, because I read a fair number of books on Buddhism and mindfulness, I never really encountered this idea or this term, unconditional happiness, before. I guess I knew it from other kinds of ways, but hearing the term or reading the term unconditional happiness kind of just set my mind racing. It explained to me why I used to feel this strange bitter taste in my mouth every time YouTube would recommend certain kinds of videos to me, specifically the ones where there were 18 to 25-year-old people and their mothers talking about how they basically have 20 streams of income and make $20,000 a month. More broadly, I'd get the same kind of bitter taste when I'd see other kind of productivity videos and productivity gurus who would kind of champion this idea of making every minute of our waking lives super productive just for the sake of it. These people will talk about how we can be productive literally every minute of our lives from the day we're born till we're buried 6 feet under the ground, as if unrelenting productivity and planning is the secret to a good life. Something about these videos and what these folks were always propositioning just always felt a little off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I came across this concept. None of these videos would talk about why in the world we're even trying to be this productive. What's the premise of this? What's the point? Perhaps the fact that nobody's even questioning this idea and we're kind of just going full speed ahead with the idea that, okay, we should be productive every minute of our lives, is an indicator of how much faith we're putting into the fact that just being productive can make us happy. That our happiness is conditioned on pure productivity just for the sake of it. If you're occupied, you're happy, perhaps through distraction, but that doesn't matter. If you're unhappy, it's probably because you have too much time on your hands. Constant and urgent productivity and busyness is championed as the way to a happy and a good life. But to me, this whole idea of being constantly occupied with something has always felt more like an avoidance strategy to distract ourselves from the call of the void than anything else. It was never a real, proper solution. What I found for myself was that I kept using these kind of future goals and plans and planning for the future as a way to feel good about myself in the moment. That I'm working towards something. It didn't really matter exactly what it was. But then often when I would actually go ahead and achieve that goal, get to wherever I wanted to be, I would again be haunted by the question, well, now what? Now that I'm here, what next? And really, what I found was that if my goals weren't necessarily aimed towards either helping somebody or really improving my own mental, physical, or spiritual health, I would notice that my goals were really just some pretty arbitrary ideas I kind of used to almost trick myself into becoming busy and kind of avoiding my problems or my larger questions. And then in response to the answer of what now, I would just go ahead and make another new goal and start going there. Where exactly? Nobody knows, but somewhere, as long as I was keeping myself occupied. What I realized was that when we're often setting some really high and arbitrary goals, whether they're productivity goals or income goals, I think sometimes we can trick ourselves into setting some pretty almost irrational and unnecessary income and productivity goals as a way to just keep working towards something. And I think that along the way, we're just sort of obsessing over the certain goal, a certain kind of a number, and we kind of just forget how to live joyfully, or just never learn it in the first place. I kind of find that I begin imagining I'll have access to some joy that can only be found when I have 10 income streams, or 20 income streams, or even 5 income streams. That sounds ridiculous, and that's because it is. And the funny or tragic thing is that all this time I was spending working on this certain income goal or productivity goal, I could have really been using that time to understand what it truly means to be happy unconditionally. I didn't have to spend all this time thinking about and trying to monetize every breath I took and every idea I've ever had. Because the truth is that we really only need so much money, and after that, there's a lot of diminishing returns. We can trick ourselves though into believing we really need that additional piece of luxury, additional thing, just so we have some more goal or something to work towards. But if we're actually able to be honest with ourselves and really say, you know what, we actually do have enough, more things are not going to necessarily bring us that much more joy. Romhart, in his book We're the Economy, talks about how a lot more joy at that point comes from friendships, relationships, community, and having some kind of purpose. When I think about this in terms of just Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I realize that When we're setting some really high standards for ourselves for like physiological comfort and safety, we're kind of just expanding the bottom two levels of the pyramid to be these really, really big steps. And then we risk kind of just getting stuck in those two steps and never moving up. We've kind of entrapped ourselves into these first two steps, and we've kind of missed the bigger picture. We're just confining ourselves to living pretty shallow lives. Now, I think people will try and be clever and use this statement that they believe kind of disproves the fact that excessive money can't bring us happiness. They'll say something along the lines of, well, would you rather cry on the street or cry in a BMW? I'd prefer to cry in a BMW. But this is really just a false dichotomy, and it really makes no sense, because let's just bring back Maslow's hierarchy. Once you reach the very top of kind of self-actualization, you kind of end up realizing that you don't really even care for the BMW or the street. You're simply better than that. You're operating on a different plane. It's clear to me that I really had to be dreaming a lot bigger. Unfortunately, though, a lot of our dreams are influenced by our environments and advertising, and most of the advertising we see are not going to be promoting things like mindfulness and being satisfied, because our economy is really driven by excessive, luxurious consumption. An idea that can potentially reduce aggregate demand is not going to get airtime. And actually, going back to that BMW question, just for the sake of it, I actually think a better question to ask is, would you rather be happy in a BMW, knowing that your joy was linked to the BMW and similar markers of wealth, or would you rather be happy regardless of whether or not you had a BMW? And I would much prefer the latter. And the latter is unconditional happiness. It's not conditioned on anything. And the way to kind of be unconditionally happy, from what I've read and also what just makes sense, is to just be a lot more mindful. Mindfulness, from what I've experienced, is about really being at peace with ourselves, knowing what we stand for, what our values are, and kind of trying our best to live according to those values. It is not how a lot of people have corrupted the concept about being focused on just managing your emotions so you can reduce your mental breakdowns and use that extra time and attention towards being financially productive. So, in We Are the Economy, Kai Romhart says that unconditional happiness comes when we rest deeply within ourselves and are able to connect with everything that is. I think that's a deceptively simple statement, because there's a lot going on there if you decide to read it really closely. Let's just ask a couple questions. What does it mean to rest deeply? What does it mean to be within ourselves? What does it mean to connect with everything that is? What does it mean for things to be as is? And what does it mean for us to have an ability to connect? Where does that ability come from? How do we get there? How do we get that? All of this has to be understood through mindfulness practice. It is clear to me that unconditional happiness requires a lot of mental training and fortitude. Realigning with our true needs, realizing that we may already have everything we need, that we have enough, that we simply don't need so much, and that kind of realization can offer us the freedom to go and explore other things. I think the really cool thing about unconditional happiness, or even just working towards it, which is kind of where I'm at right now, is that you kind of see immediate results. You almost immediately realize how much space other people's opinions and ideas kind of occupy in your mind that you don't really have to pay any attention to if you're willing to be radically honest with yourself. Instead of looking outwards at what other people have or advertising, I actually look inwards a lot more for inspiration. I find myself doing a lot more things that just give me joy in doing them, rather than trying to kind of present an image of happiness or success. In the end, I think a lot of people are focusing on productivity and building all this income and wealth, a lot more than they probably would ever need, coming from a place of worry, whereas I am trying to do things in the world coming from a place of joy and happiness. It's not something we've ever been trained to do, because a lot of us still operate from what's called a scarcity mindset. In the end, while everyone is kind of focused on productionalizing every breath and minute and attention of their lives, coming usually from a place of anxiety or worry, even though we live in a time of affluence, not scarcity, I'm trying to focus more on building myself and my mind towards unconditional happiness. In the end, I'd rather not be crying in a BMW or on the street. My goals and dreams are bigger than that. I'd rather just be happy. Alright you guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. When I kind of came across the idea of unconditional happiness, just read the two words together, my mind, like I said, was literally just racing. I felt like I'd unlocked or heard this magical thing that somehow I was just never thinking about before. I hope it's something that kind of inspired you, maybe gave you something to think about, especially in relation to your current goals as they are. If there's anything you want to discuss, an idea you want to challenge, as always, I'm happy to discuss and challenge and talk about them. So leave that down in the comments below. If you like this kind of content, then subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up because that's always very encouraging to me. Share this video with somebody if you think they'll enjoy it too. And with that, I'll see you all next time.